Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name's Ardil and today is an episode of Sound Off. Sound Off is an episode series that we started to, in essence, give back to you guys in terms of understanding a little bit more about what you guys get from factory systems, what is actually behind the scenes before you guys consider an upgrade. So today's vehicle that we're focusing on is actually a 2020 Aston Martin Vantage. I want to just go through kind of, first of all, what we've got in front of us, and then we'll be going kind of a side-by-side comparison, why manufacturers do what they do, and why we've got a difference in quality of component here. So, firstly, let's go through the actual vehicle itself. So the 2020 Aston Martin Vantage. So these are foundation level underneath pretty much a Mercedes. However, the audio side of things are slightly different. So on the new shape Mercedes platform and on the Aston Martin, traditionally, you've got a tweeter, a mid-range, a mid-bass, and then for instance, rear speakers, and then very rarely do you find a sub in them. Some of them you do, some of them you don't. However, on this particular spec of vehicle, what we've got is, in essence, a three-way front end. We've got a tweeter, a mid-range, a mid-bass, and then we've got there's no rear speakers, there's no designated sub. However, there is one little rear speaker which sits kind of in the center console right at the back, more really just for rear parking sensors and kind of beeps and bonks. So that's an independent speaker and very similar to the one that we've got here. So let me take you back to the raw basics of audio. So in terms of speakers, I just want to give you guys a bit more of an understanding about it, because you might have a wealth of knowledge already and be a full audio enthusiast, but you might be starting off in the world of audio and wanting to learn a little bit more. So the higher frequencies, you've got lots of speakers in a vehicle, and traditionally what we've got here is actually a pretty good example. So you've got a tweeter, a mid-range, and a mid-bass, and then a sub, okay? So these, in terms of components, are kind of the fundamental parts of sound, and this will then play the full frequency range. So human ears can hear from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, okay? So that is kind of the frequency range that we work with in terms of sound. Your tweeter, basically, this deals with higher frequencies, so kind of your clarity mostly comes from that product and that higher end kind of sound that stays normally anywhere from around about sort of the 4,000 or 5,000 hertz all the way up to that 20,000 hertz. Then you move over to a mid-range. So some of the systems in cars don't actually have a mid-range at all, and it's not too much of a problem, but the way I kind of describe a mid-range, or adding a mid-range into a vehicle that doesn't have one, is it's one of those products that kind of takes the strain away from the other two products surrounding it. So surrounding a mid-range, you've got a tweeter dealing with higher end, and then you've got a mid-bass, which is basically that middle to lower section of that frequency graph. And a mid-range kind of just sits in that middle gap. And what that in essence does is it just makes it takes the strain away. The tweeter's not having to work as hard. The mid-bass driver's not need to work as hard. And in essence, it just sounds more natural. And a mid-range actually does a lot of a frequency range. They can play from around about sort of normally 5,000 hertz down to kind of 250 generally is what I normally run them at. But every car is slightly different depending on the setup, but it does a massive section of your frequency range. And obviously without that product in the mix, your tweeter's having to battle and your mid-bass is having to battle. So in my mind, if you can fit a mid-range into a vehicle, it's always a massive benefit to be able to do that, because it makes everything sound so much more natural. Then moving down in the frequency range, you move over to a mid-bass driver, and this is normally positioned in the bottom of the door in, for example, Ferraris, Lambos, Land Rover, most vehicles out there, VW, Audi, the mid-bass driver is mounted in the bottom of the door. This is providing basically what's called the mid-bass section. So normally from around about sort of, depending on the mid-bass driver, anywhere from like 50 to 70 hertz up to roughly kind of around about sort of 600-700 hertz, depending on obviously the setup that you're using and whatnot, but they can play higher as well. So that is providing a little bit of kick and that mid-bass kind of warmth of sound, and brings a little bit of that depth further forward into a vehicle. Once they have done their thing, so that's in essence the front end of the car looked after, and that's generally speaking what you've got in the front of your vehicle, then you move over to adding the bass into the vehicle, this designated sub. So with a sub, and the difference between a mid-bass driver and a sub is very, very different. A lot of people get told, it's a complete lie, that a mid-bass driver will do the same thing as a sub. 100% not. It physically cannot, in the physical dimensions of the speaker, physically, it's just not possible. So a sub in a vehicle makes a huge difference. And you're going to say to me in the comments, I'm sure, we've done systems without a sub before. Yes, you can do it. However, you're not playing as deep as what a sub will. With a subwoofer, and you'll see by the dimensional size of a 6.5-inch mid-bass or a 7-inch mid-bass or an 8-inch mid-bass over a 10-inch sub, the physical size of the damn thing is absolutely massive. And with that in mind, it's really important because bass is down to what's called excursion of a cone. So how much a cone can move backwards and forwards, in essence moving more air. So for you American audience out there where you love a big 15 or even an 18-inch sub in a vehicle or two 12s, in essence, the reason why you're getting more bass is because the physical cone is bigger, so you have more scope for it to flow backwards and forwards, and also you have a deeper sub generally. Again, more excursion of that cone, creating more movement of air, creating more bass. Okay. However, in the UK market, and we're generally speaking, what we're dealing with is smaller subs like an 8, a 10-inch shallow like we're doing here. And also what we're doing is for example, a 12. And we do deep versions as well. However, predominantly, as you've seen by our channel, most of the cars that we get in are having these shallow mounted design because most of them are very high performance car like the Aston Martin Vantage. So that's now understood in terms of configuration of frequency ranges of what each speaker does. But now you've got to be thinking about what manufacturers do. So on the Aston Martin Vantage 2020 model, we have a couple of things. We have a tweeter, we have a mid-range, and we have a mid-bass driver. So there's no designated sub in the vehicle, okay? So we've stripped the whole car down. There's no designated sub in this vehicle on this particular spec. So the mid-bass driver, in your brain you might be thinking, well, it should then be a decent mid-bass driver to kind of compensate against the fact that you haven't got a sub in the vehicle. And now time to reveal the truth. So this is the mid-bass driver for the Aston Martin 2020 model. This is what you don't see, okay? So the reason why you probably got in your car and gone, this sounds absolutely, yeah, you know what my next word is going to be, is because of things like this. This is the mid-bass driver from the car. This actually sits not in the bottom of the door, it actually sits behind the pedals on either side. And that is just absolutely, well, you can see the quality yourself. That is never, ever gonna give you anywhere near what a designated sub is going to give you, or even a decent mid-bass. I mean, the difference alone in size is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the magnet, the structure, the feel of it, it's just completely different. So with that in mind, you've got to be thinking, well, no wonder this car sounds awful, because you've got no sub in the vehicle, so you've got no real depth of sound. And if any, well, you would have heard it yourself in the car. This speaker is trying to do what this is doing. There's no way in hell it can do it. And that's part of the fundamental flaws of manufacturers. What you don't see, what's hidden behind the panels. Yes, the grills look absolutely lovely. Yes, the interior looks absolutely fantastic. But the reason why cars are in with us all the time, and especially on these higher level of cars, is because of these sorts of issues. Is because it's all hidden and there's no money spent on them. With that in mind, obviously, with the physical dimensions of what this is, as what I've said earlier in today's video, if you take all that into consideration about excursion of a cone, talking about movement of more air, that thing is never, ever going to be able to deliver what a designated sub is going to be like. And there's a couple of things manufacturers do which really does confuse me. And well, I know it doesn't actually confuse me, because at the end of the day, it's a business for them. for most owners, it'll be enough and it's fine, and they're buying the car for different reasons or whatever. However, there's so many people out there like this client that aren't happy with that, and they don't want to compromise. They bought a lovely car, they spent a lot of money, and they're just getting the car and go, it sounds absolutely awful. And the reason is because of fundamental things like this. Yes, the product is what we're comparing, but it's all down to also how it's installed. So that's the mid-bass driver, and I don't really need to talk any more about that. That is pretty obvious where that fundamental flaw is, and that is pretty much doing a mid-bass driver as well as a sub, which is just really struggling to do anything really at all. So that's the mid-bass. We move over to then the mid-range and the higher frequencies. Obviously the car doesn't have a designated sub, so we can't really do a comparison of that, but the higher end frequency. So let's now start over with that. So we've got two products here. We've got side by side a mid-range and a mid-range. So these actually sit in the door in a really lovely grille and an absolutely stunning door card. So these are designed basically, and these are actually, I think the magnet is bigger than on the mid-bass driver, or pretty much the very, very similar size. So you've got to be thinking, well, why on earth have you got a similar size magnet on a mid-range rather than a mid-bass, whereas this is supposed to be producing more, moving more air, doing more work. But the mid-range in the car actually isn't too bad. So the magnet size isn't bad at all. In terms of the design, obviously it's very cheaply made in terms of the cone, and the structure is plastic. So I mean, it's not great, obviously, but it's better than what we've got as a mid-bass. So if you compare products side by side, the mid-range is actually probably a better product than what they put in terms of the mid-bass in the car. This is actually from built by ASK, so ASK, which are predominantly used actually in Porsches as well. So fundamentals are kind of there, but just not the best of quality. Then we've got our mid-range, which we're putting in, which is the Hertzmüller Legend set. Just a far better structure. Obviously the difference in magnet is there. I believe this is a neodymium magnet. I believe this is a ferrite magnet, and this is a neodymium magnet. That's why it's smaller but denser. But yeah, I mean, in terms of physical dimensions, obviously this is a 3-inch, this is a 4 that goes into the vehicle, but they're going to go into OEM location. So the mid-range, actually not too bad of a comparison there. Now we move over to the higher frequencies, okay? So with higher frequencies, again, we're talking about the kind of the intricate bits of sound, okay? So you've got this absolutely ginormous grille that sits right on top of the dashboard, and you might be thinking, well, that's a pretty damn big speaker. I mean, not far off from being able to put your mid-range in there, okay? So it's pretty damn big. I'd probably say it's just a bit smaller than a 3-inch. So we've got the tweeter, okay? And now time to see, this is the bit you guys see. This is the bit, if you own one of these cars, that's the bit you see, okay? And now I'm going to flip it over and you guys are going to see what we see. And this is partly, again, the reason why things sound so bad in factory cars. So are you ready? There it is. I mean, it is absolutely miniature in there. I mean, a tweeter doesn't need to be very big, don't get me wrong. Tweeters are generally a small product. So for example, the Hertzmüller Legend tweeter, it's not a mid-bass driver, it's very, very small, it's very, very intricate. But I mean, come on, that is just, yeah, well, that's it. That says it all. I mean, the size difference there. And this will sit behind the original location. So with all our systems and this whole system going into the car, the front speakers are all actually going to go into the OEM location. So in the OEM locations, you could have had, from manufacturer, a better setup. We could have put in these speakers. They're going to go in OEM locations. The noise in the background, I don't know if you can hear it well, but that's one of our new 3D printers. We just invested in another one just because of how many adapters and installs we're doing at a time. So that's running at the moment, and we're just testing that out on a couple of adapters. The reason why that basically is we 3D print adapters is because everything's then reversible. Obviously, these 4 holes here don't match up with the 4 holes here, so we're going to be designing, fabricating an adapter, and then putting them into the vehicle. So overall, basically you've got a front end of a car that really lacks, very poor quality, and then you're now changing over to the Hertz Mille Legend set, which is going to be a world of difference alone. But this car also doesn't have rear speakers, so we're going to be adding in rear speakers with the Audison Voce range, the tweeter and the mid-range, going into the back in a custom panel. Then we're going to be adding the sub into the vehicle as well, and you might be thinking, well, where on earth is the sub going to go? The sub is actually going to be mounted into a custom enclosure behind the seats. Well, obviously, there are some more products to go in, like the amplification, which we're not doing that comparison of, because in essence, all we've got in the car is these three components. And to be honest, what you've seen today, these aren't going to sound very good at all. But hopefully today has given you a bit more of an in-depth dive into kind of the fundamental flaws of factory systems, what you guys get when you're ticking a box from factory, what you get behind the scenes, like this grille here. You see this bit, yeah, it looks lovely when it's in the dash, looks absolutely spectacular, but this is what's behind the scenes. This is what you're really paying for. And are you happy with that? Personally, I wouldn't be. There's many of our clients that aren't. This client that's in at the moment has got in the car and gone, absolutely love the car, absolutely hate the sound system, so let's change that. So again, product is really important, but it's all down to the in-store. We're chatting to people in Kenya at the moment, all over the world, all over the country, where people are sending their cars over to us to have the installation done professionally, properly, and have a proper in-depth dive, again, understanding about what they're actually getting. And that's the whole purpose of these videos, to give you guys an understanding about what the differences are between stock and then the Cambridge car audio treatment. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed today's video and really kind of hopefully understood a little bit more about car audio in general, but also a bit more of a deep dive into the Aston Martin Vantage. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.